Hi everyone, this is Owen from Fearless RC, and today I'm going to be showing you how to remove the engine on a Rovan Baja. This is the same platform as the King Motor Baja as well, and we sell all these vehicles on our website. This is one of our more popular vehicles. This is the 36cc ready to run, and this engine is having an issue, so today I'm going to show you how to uninstall the engine, and we're actually going to upgrade to a 45cc engine, which is a slightly larger displacement, so it has a little more power. The 45cc usually does wheelies and everything, so it's a little more fun to drive. And yeah, this will just be a tutorial on how to take the car apart, remove the engine, and put the new engine in. The first thing that I like to do is take the wheels off and then use the wheels to hold the car up. It's just nice when you're working on it and it's off the ground. There's also stands that we sell that you can use. And first we gotta remove the body. So there's these pins all around. So there's the main piece of the body, and then there's this other part that it broke slightly, but normally it's held in by these two pins on the bottom, and it's held into this piece. And then the other thing I'm just going to mention quick too is it's a lot easier to work on the Baja when your gas tank is empty. So before this video we drained all the gas out of here, so there's no more gas. There's another part of the body. So there's this piece and it's connected. There's this plastic part. There's this plastic piece underneath the car, and the way you remove it is there's a pin in the very back that you pull out, a tiny little pin, and then you bring this down and just pull directly back. You can see there are these little tabs that hold it in place, and sometimes grass will get in here and stuff, so you can clean it out. And then keep all our pins to the side. So now the car, we removed the body. Just to make this car a little easier to work on, I'm also going to remove the wing. So there's two pins underneath the wing. A little tricky to get to. Pull straight up. The pins are under here on either side. There's just two of them. You just want to have some hex wrenches, and this Baja we were working on a little bit, so the screws are missing in a few spots, but there's normally 4 screws that hold this piece on. So now this piece comes off, and then you can get to your spark plug easier if you ever have to do that. Next step is going to be removing this shock tower, so then we can remove the roll cage. And there's just 4 screws on the back of the shock tower. There's also these little washers on the back of the shock tower. You just want to make sure you don't lose those. Alright, now the shock tower is loose. You can see I can remove it from the car, and you don't actually have to fully take this off. I can just leave it the way it is. And then to get the roll cage off, there's 4 pins. 2 on the back, and then there's 2 over here underneath, and these also have a little washer. You just want to make sure you don't lose it. There's one on the other side, so we got those. And then the front of this will pop up, the back of this will pop out, and then the last thing is there's like a tab right here underneath this aluminum plate that you have to push down and pull the whole thing forward. And now I can remove the whole roll cage. So that's the whole top of the car off, and I'll just set it aside. Just to make my life a little easier, I'm going to take the exhaust off. When you're changing the engine, it's a good time to also upgrade the exhaust if that's something you want to do. So to get to these 2 bolts on the exhaust, you usually need a pretty long bit, and so I just come in through the back of the car like this, and then loosen it. And then there's usually a couple gaskets back here. You just want to make sure you don't lose the gaskets. Here, these are the gaskets that I'm talking about. Got both screws off. Okay, and then there's usually on the exhaust there's 2 bolts on the engine, and then there's another bolt that just holds the bottom of it together. So this is just a smaller screw. There it is. Okay. And now I can take, there's the whole exhaust. Alright, so next thing I'm going to do is take the air filter off, and there's just this little piece you have to pry on, and then you can pull the air filter off. It's a little tricky to get the bottom of it disconnected, but sometimes you can use a little flathead screwdriver. There we go. So here's all the sections to this. If you're worried about debris getting in your engine, in the exhaust or the intake, you can put a piece of tape over this or put a shop towel in there just to block any debris. The other thing here is removing the fuel lines. Removing the fuel lines is usually a little easier with pliers, and you want to use one that doesn't have these teeth on the inside so you don't damage the fuel line. So I have one of these needle nose that's just flat, and that's usually good for removing fuel lines. And the way I also remove fuel lines is sometimes there'll be gas left in the carb here. So I remove the feed line first, which is the black fuel line that's underneath. So that's removed. And then you take the cap off so that there's no pressure in the tank, and you let all the fuel drain down this tube. So that's drained out right now. And then for the return, there's still some fuel in here, so I just pump the carb a few times, and that gets all the fuel out of this line and into the tank. And then you can disconnect the other fuel line and put your cap back on. We're gonna start taking these side covers off. So there's a little pin here on the side that just takes this off. And the other side, there's one on the other side. Done. And then we have some bolts. So there's one bolt here on the engine. Take this off. Alright, so that's good. So now I'm going to take the spur gear cover off. There's just two pins behind the spur gear cover, and then it pops off. So that's the way it looks. Keep those together. And then here's the spur gear. You can just look at it, make sure that all the teeth are still there and everything. This little cover just pops off. That sometimes gets lost pretty easily. Keep that aside. So you can just take a flathead screwdriver in these little notches right here on the gear, and you just put it in and twist, and then you'll be able to pry this off gently. Okay. So then the gear just slides off with the E-clip. There's also a spacer in here. This spacer is really important. You don't want to lose this spacer. So there's two bolts on either side of the pinion gear that we're going to remove. And these ones were actually coming loose, so it's good that we're doing this right now because these were about to come out. There's this plastic part right here that basically, this plastic part ties into the brakes, and some Bajas have this, some don't, but this bolt is a little tricky to get to, so I just use a L wrench and a pliers for this one. Okay, and then so I don't damage the brakes, I'm gonna leave this loose until the very end. This will be the last bolt I take out. The first one is right here. It's this one it's on a weird angle, but you should be able to get a tool up and under the suspension arm, and then it just comes off like this. And then there's one other bolt right here that has to come out. There are these three on the bottom of the engine. There's one here, which is also a little loose, so good we're taking this apart. The first one, and there's these two that are near the pull start. Alright, so those are the three underneath. There's also a spacer right here. This spacer is right under the clutch, and you just want to make sure you don't lose that spacer. It's really important. Alright, so, oh, there's another spacer. It just fell out. That spacer, whoops, I forgot about this one. This is another spacer. It's over here. It's right under the red button on the engine. There's a spacer that's for this bolt, so you also want to keep that. So the last thing I always forget is the linkage. So you just push forward on this black piece and it'll pop off, and then you can pull it out of the carb and just keep it to the side. So there's also a bolt here we're going to remove, and then this metal plate will come off. And then to make this a little easier, I'm also going to remove the carb, and it's just these two screws here. Okay, now our carb came off. Alright, so now I can pull the engine out so it comes straight out the side. And you can see this engine was definitely used. It was well loved and well used, so we got its life out of it, and it's ready for a new engine. So here's our new engine. You can see it's a 45cc from Rovan. And to get this in there a little bit easier, same way when I took the original one off, I'm going to take the carb off temporarily. Okay. Okay, so in addition to removing the carb, we're going to take the clutch off the old engine. And this is the stock clutch housing. The one on your Baja might look slightly different if you have an aftermarket one. Alright, now it's ready to go in the car. And first bolt is going to be this one right here. I'm going to put the carb on. And sometimes before I put the carb on, I actually like to connect the fuel lines because it's a little tricky to get to them once the carb is on. And the feed line is always the one that's on the bottom of the carb. The return is on the top. And then this is ready to go back on. Okay. So this linkage can get put back in place. The little metal rod goes into the lever on the carb, and then you have to push this little black piece. You have to push it back into place around that lever so it doesn't come off. And now it's good. And then while I'm here, I'm going to put the air filter back on. Alright, that's all good. And then I can just start putting all the screws back. So the other thing with this is you kind of want to start with all of them loose and then tighten them up slowly. Otherwise the gear mesh can be slightly off. It can be hard for the transmission to spin. You can see when I spin the transmission, this is nice and free. That's the way you want it to be. If it's loose, or if it's really tight or doesn't feel right, something is not correct and you want to check what's wrong. And put these back on. So there was a screw here on the front of the engine, but this new clutch housing doesn't have any threads there, so you don't really need this screw. There's so many screws holding the engine in that it's not necessary. So this front one we're just going to omit. We don't need it. But I will put this one in. This also holds the top of the clutch housing. Okay. And then I can put this back on. I guess on this side I didn't actually need to really remove it. Okay. On the other side, you have to put this piece back. Just slides on. And then I'm going to leave this one loose because this is that spacer that fell out earlier, so it goes right here and this screw holds it. Okay, this one on the back again, this long screw. So there's just 2 screws underneath the engine now. Alright, now I have all the bolts around the engine tight. I just want to check again that this is still aligned and everything's good. And then I'm actually just going to double check all these are also tight. These are the bolts that like to come loose, and if these come loose they can damage your spur gear. I'm going to check these too. Yeah, everything was just a little loose, which is fine. Just keep it all tight. Okay, so that's good. And then remember the spacer behind the spur gear. Spacer goes on, then the spur gear. And then we have the E-clip. So sometimes these E-clips can get spaced out, so I like to crush them just a tiny bit so they're a little tighter, and then you just put it back on this slot. And this you're going to want to crush with the pliers like this. There we go. And once again, you just want to check that this is running smoothly. It's not binding up. You can see when I spin it, it keeps spinning a little bit. So it's nice and free. Everything's going to run really nice. Don't forget this little black piece. So that goes right here behind the gear. And then we can put this back on to protect the gears. There's just 2 pins back here. Okay, we're ready to put the exhaust back on. This is the one that came off. It's pretty dirty, so I'm just going to clean this up and make sure that we don't have any debris on the gasket, so then the gasket can go on nice. So I'm just going to use one gasket in this case. Alright, so now we're going to tighten both of these. And basically the way I do this is I tighten one side until it's pretty snug but not fully tight, like that, and then I'll tighten the other side. You just want to make sure they're tightened down evenly, so we press that gasket evenly. So I'll just get this one, and now this one I'm going to tighten fully. Can go a little more. Okay, and then I'll do the other side. Fully tighten. And then sometimes I like to come back and just check this one. Yeah. Alright. Roll cage is simple. Goes under the shock tower. Pop in these back 2. Those 2 have a pin on either side. And there's these 2 pins in the front with the washers. And the other thing is this top piece, you just want to snap it back into the other piece of the roll cage, and then pop in the front. And we'll put our pins on the bottom. Alright, so both pins are in, roll cage is in. Now we're going to put the shock tower back on. And remember, the shock tower had these little spacers behind it, so I'm just going to remember to keep those in the right spot. They go right here in the plastic. And I'll put this one in too. Okay. The longer bolt for the shock tower goes in the bottom, and the shorter bolt goes in the top. There we go. Alright, 2 shorter ones on top. The rear shock tower's on. The other thing I forgot was the bolt that holds the bottom of the exhaust. So that just goes under here. Alright, last few things. We're going to put this back on top. Just covers the, protects the top of the engine. Alright, so we're going to put the bottom part of the body back on. And there are these slots that you want to make sure this gets into. And then you push it forward. And it should pop into the pin on the back. Yep. And then the little tiny pin goes in the back. This piece is broken, so I'm going to fix it later after the video. We'll put the main part of the body on though for now. So one other thing is, when we're installing the 45cc engine, this has a much larger pull start. So what a lot of people do is they'll actually cut the body here so that it fits the pull start. And I'm not going to do that in this video, but basically if you're fitting a 45, you can cut the body so that you can fit the pull start in. And the last thing is really just putting the wing on. Aside from a little cutting on the body, this is ready to go.